There are more than 7 billion people in this world, but the one who can make a change is you. What you say matters. What you do matters. Holocaust Museum Houston. From darkness, light. can't know all 7 billion people in this world, but you can reach out to the ones you encounter today. It's hard to hate up close. Holocaust Museum Houston. From darkness, light. There are more than 7 billion people in this world, but the one who can make a change is you. What you say matters. What you do matters. Holocaust Museum Houston. From darkness, light. You can't know all 7 billion people in this world, but you can reach out to the ones you encounter today. It's hard to hate up close. Holocaust Museum Houston. From darkness, light.
Hello, and welcome to the 25th Annual Lyndon Baines Johnson Moral Courage Award virtual event. These extraordinary times call for innovative thinking and creative solutions. People around the world are adapting by learning new ways to connect with family, friends, and organizations. At Holocaust Museum Houston, we are doing the same, practicing social distancing by turning our annual dinner into a virtual experience. The fact that we are able to gather virtually is exceedingly important. Our mission of remembrance and Holocaust education that serves to fight hatred, prejudice, and apathy is more critical than ever, especially during this pandemic. With the unexpected closure of our wonderful new museum due to the coronavirus, the museum staff quickly retooled to create virtual tours, online activities, research guides, and lesson plans for families, students, and teachers. New assets are added to our website each week. Our efforts are working. Traffic on our website has increased by 35%, and these resources are being utilized every day. I encourage you to view them at hmh.org/resources. The Moral Courage Award event is one of Houston's largest and most widely recognized philanthropic evenings, supporting the worldwide education programs of the museum. Every year, the event is vital. This year, however, the funds are essential to our health as an organization. The reality of closing our doors meant that we were forced to make severe budget cuts to remain operational. So achieving our fundraising goal of $1.2 million for our virtual event is essential. If you are willing and able to support our efforts as a leader in Holocaust education and human rights, please help us with a donation by texting HMH to 41444 or by contributing online at hmh.org/tribute. Your support will go a long way as we work to reopen our museum and increase visitor attendance. Holocaust Museum Houston created the Lyndon Baines Johnson Moral Courage Award in 1994 in cooperation with the Johnson family. You see, in 1938, as a young congressman, Johnson stretched the limits of his authority and risked his personal dreams to provide American sanctuary for threatened European Jews. It is because of these acts of moral courage that the museum proudly named the award in his honor. The Lyndon Baines Johnson Moral Courage Award recognizes either a single righteous act or a lifetime of morally courageous behavior. It is presented to individuals who have taken a stand against injustice, hatred, and prejudice, those who have used their skills and influence to make a better world for all people. May 8th is the 75th anniversary of VE Day, celebrating the formal acceptance by the Allies of World War II of Nazi Germany's unconditional surrender. It is fitting that this evening we celebrate moral courage from World War II to the current day, culminating with a presentation of the 2020 Lyndon Baines Johnson Moral Courage Award to the family of the late Brigadier General Felix L. Sparks. Brigadier General Sparks was an American military commander of the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division of the United States Army. We are so pleased to honor Brigadier General Sparks' service to our country, to honor his humanity and leadership during a war filled with hatred, prejudice, and horrific violence. And we look forward to hearing a virtual conversation between World War II historian and New York Times best-selling author Alex Kershaw and Holocaust survivor Pinchas Gutter. Before we hear from Alex and Pinchas, I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the many contributors who support our powerful mission. Without you, we could not do the important work of using the lessons of the Holocaust to teach the dangers of hatred, prejudice, and apathy. Last June, after a 2-year, $34 million expansion, we began a new chapter in our history by reopening the museum. Now more than double in size, let's take a look at the new Holocaust Museum Houston, Lester and Sue Smith campus. We are so proud of our newly expanded Holocaust Museum Houston, Lester and Sue Smith campus. The architecture is simply stunning. The utilization of light throughout the building, in contrast with the dark history of the Holocaust, leaves visitors with a positive message of hope and the desire to take action as upstanders in today's world. That is exactly what our survivors envisioned. The museum is a memorial to those that died in the Holocaust, and yet an institution of moral leadership teaching the lessons of the Holocaust and the importance of fighting hatred, prejudice, and apathy. Our new facility ranks as the nation's 4th largest Holocaust museum and the first to be fully bilingual in English and in Spanish. The 3-story structure houses the Morgan Family Welcome Center, which sets the tone of the guest experience. We feature 4 permanent galleries, including Bearing Witness, a community remembers Holocaust gallery, where 2 of our most precious artifacts are now housed in a climate-controlled environment. In becoming one of the top Holocaust museums in the country, HMH has broadened its mission as a super-regional hub for Holocaust education and a national voice for human rights and social justice. That is why the addition of the Lester and Sue Smith Human Rights Gallery, with educational displays of all UN-recognized genocides, as well as tributes to human rights exemplars, is so pertinent to students and other visitors. Teen voices are important, and HMH created the first of its kind permanent exhibition on teen diarists. The Rona and Bruce Caress and Still I Write Young Diarists on War and Genocide Gallery includes an interactive media display that brings to life the writings of 12 teen diarists who wrote during the Holocaust and other genocides around the world. Central to the new building are the Edith and Joseph Mintzberg and Spira Central Galleries with extraordinary changing exhibitions showcased throughout the year. At the heart of the museum, you'll find the Gerald B. Katz Family Butterfly Loft that represent and memorialize the 1.5 million children that perished in the Holocaust. The second floor opens to the Moral Choices Hall, featuring the Survivors' Wall made of Jerusalem stone, with nearly 1,000 names of Holocaust survivors who called Houston home after the war. It is also home to the Samuel Bach Gallery and Learning Center, the nation's largest gallery of artwork by Holocaust survivor and painter Samuel Bach. The new Albert and Ethel Herstein Theater, featuring the Maddie and Ken Katie's Stage, has been a huge attraction as HMH has partnered with several of Houston's robust performing arts organizations. We are focused on educational excellence with quadrupled learning space in the Boniak Center for the Future of Holocaust and Human Rights and Genocide Studies. Add to this the Boniak Library for research, technology enhancements, and innovative educational programs. All ensure our resources are at an all-time high. With the rise in anti-Semitism, hate crimes, and threats to human rights within our own country, our role in education and outreach is more important than ever before. We understand that what you do and what you say matters, which is why our message continues to be from darkness, light. The honorary chairs for this year's historic event include the Honorable Lena Hidalgo, Harris County Judge, Lucy Baines Johnson, and the Honorable Sylvester Turner, Mayor, City of Houston. And special thanks goes out to our host committee chairs, Erica and Benji Levitt. Our dinner chairs exemplify the heart of Houston's philanthropic community. 3 dynamic couples came together to provide their time and influence to help tonight's event become a success. We are forever grateful to this year's dinner chairs, Heidi and David Gerger, Sultana and Moaz Bengali, and Andrea and Bill White.
Thank you for tuning in and making this evening a success. As a second-generation survivor, the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Dachau propelled me to be part of this evening. In the museum's 25-year history, our mission and outreach have never been more important than today.
Dachau was the first concentration camp built in 1933 for political prisoners, then Catholic priests, Jehovah's Witnesses, and eventually Jews. In 1945, the Nazis tried to destroy the evidence of what happened there. And one reason they failed was our honoree, Felix Sparks. He commanded an American battalion that liberated Dachau and documented its horrors. After the war, he became a successful lawyer and judge, but he always made time throughout his life to teach the lessons of the Holocaust.
These are challenging times. Our museum is here to empower and inspire us to be upstanders. Thank you all for supporting Holocaust Museum Houston, and have a wonderful evening.
The Holocaust Museum teaches the value of promoting responsible individual behavior, cultivating civility, and pursuing social justice. Moyes is a member of the advisory board, and we are proud to be supporters of the museum and co-chairs of tonight's program.
I would like to continue to be a bridge to foster better understanding and tolerance between diversified communities. The tragic and horrific past events should never happen again. Never. Also, I believe in what the Moral Courage Award stands for: against injustice, hatred, and prejudice. Congratulations to the family of the late Brigadier General Felix L. Sparks. Thank you all for your support and your participation tonight.
Hi, I'm Andrea White, and this is my husband Bill, and we're delighted to be co-chairing the Holocaust Museum event tonight. I'm a long admirer of the Holocaust Museum. It's a force for the good in our community. It's a moral conscience of our community, and in these trying times, we need its voice more than ever. So thank you so much for supporting the Moral Courage Award event tonight, and I hope you have fun. We're planning on it.
And I'll tell you, I love the Holocaust Museum. You know, wisdom is something that's passed down from generation to generation. And there's a bit of wisdom about the impact that fear and ignorance can have on human nature and the devastation that can occur if we let it prevail. The Holocaust Museum teaches that lesson, not just for the people affected or their relatives or their loved ones or their co-religionists, but for all people of all generations in all countries at all time. And it's been a wonderful asset to the people of Houston. I want to tell you, here we are in the pandemic. One thing the Holocaust Museum teaches us is that something good, great lessons can occur if we take those lessons out of something very terrible. I hope that occurs here. I expect it will with the pandemic, and thank you for participating in this great event.
As our event chairs have shown us, Holocaust Museum Houston is only as good as the people who support it. That sentiment is especially true of our board chair, Benjamin Warren. Now in the final month of his chairmanship, he deserves tremendous accolades for the many accomplishments achieved during his tenure. Benjamin held a dual role during his 2-year term, as he also co-chaired the successful capital campaign with co-chair and trustee Heidi Gerger that enabled us to complete our expansion and reopen. We will be forever grateful for his guidance and generosity and for his leadership that has brought us to where we are today.
I'm so honored to be with you. As chairman of Holocaust Museum Houston, I'm proud to join you here tonight from our Survivors Wall, with nearly 1,000 names of Holocaust survivors who called Houston home after the war. Now fewer than 100 remain alive. Each survivor on this wall has their own story. Some of you are familiar with my mom's story. She led a privileged life until the war. My mother and her husband Alexander and her mother Hasya were rounded up by the Nazis, loaded onto a cattle car, and transported to Auschwitz. When the Russians were approaching Auschwitz, the camp was cleared out. She joined the death march and then ended up in Ravensbrück, a women's camp where they conducted awful experiments on the prisoners. And finally, she ended up in Bergen-Belsen camp, where she was liberated and given hope, and her humanity was returned to her. My mother survived because men like tonight's honoree, Brigadier General Felix Sparks, sacrificed their youth and many of their lives to liberate Europe 75 years ago. To survivors like my mom, this brought hope for new beginnings, a new life in America that allowed me, my children, my grandchildren, and my future great-grandchildren to exist. The lives of survivors and liberators like General Sparks will be forever entwined. Let us pause and take a moment to recognize and honor our beloved survivors who inspire us and teach us all that hope is greater than hate. We lost 13 survivors in the past year, a stark reminder of our collective role as a community to never forget. It's also a reminder that sadly, the window is closing on the last of those who are still with us today. When they are gone, it will be up to us to tell their stories. Each of us has a solemn obligation to keep their stories alive, so their truth will never be denied. Each of you with us here tonight serves as instruments of positive change today and for generations to come. We remember fondly those who have passed away this year and pay tribute to them in this video. As we commemorate the 75th anniversary of liberation, of Victory Over Europe Day, there's no more fitting person than tonight's special guest, best-selling author and historian Alex Kershaw, to interview Holocaust survivor Pinchas Guder. Author of 15 books, Alex's stories are not only about the huge number of lives lost, about the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust, or the more than 70 million deaths attributed to World War II. Alex tells the story of the individual and the individual families who were affected by each loss. In his works, his distinctive narrative style gives voice to each person he writes about, making their stories come alive. Alex is a committed historian, one dedicated to chronicling lives as well as tales of liberation and victory in Europe. To my mind, that makes him a hero. His book, The Liberator, traces the remarkable battlefield journey of our honoree, General Sparks, through the Allied liberation of Europe, from the first landing in Italy to the final death throes of the Third Reich. Ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply honored to introduce my good friend, Alex Kershaw.
Hi, it's great to be with you. My name is Alex Kershaw. I'm the author of The Liberator, the story of Felix Sparks, who is our special honoree this year, marking the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. It's a great honor and great privilege to be with you. I'm very excited about the giving of this award because Felix Sparks means an awful lot to me. Obviously, he means a great deal to Colorado and his family. Some of the members of that family will be joining us later. But he also means a great deal to me. I spent 4 or 5 years researching his life. I actually met him on his deathbed. I was able, thankfully, to conduct several hours of interviews with him before he died. And I believe that of all the many veterans that I've interviewed while writing about World War II, Felix Sparks was the greatest warrior among all of those great warriors. He fought for over 500 days to liberate Europe, joined E Company of the 157th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Thunderbird Division, and on day one that Americans started to liberate Europe, That's the 10th of July, 1943 in Sicily. He was there on the invasion beach on the very first day that we started to liberate Europe from that great, great evil. And then early on the morning of the 29th of April, 1945, he received orders that he was to not go straight to the Alpine retreat of Hitler. He was given a task force and told that he was the man, he was the American officer who would go find Hitler and capture him. He was told that that mission was not to be carried out that day. He was to go to a camp called Dachau, a place called Dachau, he was told, and liberate it. He'd never seen a concentration camp. He didn't know what a concentration camp was. And so he became, early on the morning of the 29th of April, 1945, the leader of the first Americans, the first GIs, the first working class Americans to liberate the longest standing concentration camp in Nazi Germany. Colonel Felix Sparks was there at their head, leading those men over the perimeter wall at Dachau, and then leading his men in to liberate Dachau on the 29th of April, 1945. You'll see this 26-year-old with several hundred men under his command, and he stands there, you'll see him, and he sees his men shooting these German SS soldiers who have their hands in the air. Now, after 500 days of war, after losing so many of his men in such bitter and savage fighting in Reipersweiler in January 1945 against the SS, what would you expect this man to do? Confronted with thousands of bodies, confronted with the full horror of what the Nazis had done to Europeans, what would you expect him to do? Well, here we have an image, a beautiful, beautiful image. The best image I could find from the entire 20th century, I'll be honest with you, certainly from the Second World War, of an American officer, an infantryman, an American officer leading his men with great moral courage and integrity right to the very, very bitter end. And here in this coal yard, if you follow the sequence of photographs, you'll see Felix Sparks lift his hand in the air and his pistol and fire his pistol several times, and then move his hand and shout to his men, stop, stop. So here you have an unbelievable moment in time which captures an incredible moral courage and strength. Here is a man who is different to the enemy, different to the murderers, who wants to stop his men from committing an atrocity, who wants to be righteous and just and do the correct thing, do the human thing in a moment of enormous pressure and stress. And at the very heart of darkness, he did the right thing. He stopped his men from killing men who had surrendered. And in all places, a place as hellish, as evil as Dachau, he shows us that human beings can, even under enormous pressure, even when heartbroken, even when they have been through hell, can ultimately do the right thing. So this is why I think it's very powerful and it's certainly emotional for me, and why I'm so delighted that the Houston Holocaust Museum have chosen this one American to honor him for his moral courage and integrity. Because if there's any American soldier in World War II, any liberator that deserves this honor, it's Felix Sparks.
We thought that it would be extremely important to honor an individual that demonstrated moral courage as well as being an upstander in every aspect of their life.
It is so appropriate that we present the Lyndon Baines Johnson Moral Courage Award to Brigadier General Felix Sparks, who has shown acts of moral courage through a lifetime of commitment to making the world better.
My name is Blair Sparks. He was Grandpa. He wanted to be a forest ranger. He loved animals, and he loved the outdoors, and he loved hunting, and the Forest Service wouldn't take him. They said he was too skinny, and then, of course, the war hit.
His his more than 500 days of fighting during World War II ultimately led to the liberation of the Dachau concentration camp and the freeing of 32,000 Holocaust survivors.
His journey started in Sicily. They went through Italy and then down through France, then through parts of Germany. They ended up in Dachau. Dachau was the biggest surprise to him in the war, and it really affected a lot of him and the men emotionally.
On the evening of April 28th, 1945, I got an urgent radio message. You are to proceed immediately to capture the concentration camp at Dachau. We had absolutely and utterly no information in the American Army about concentration camps. Well, the train was our first introduction to concentration camps. There were 39 cars, and each was filled with dead bodies, and they were horribly emaciated. It stunned us. We had a difficult time believing it, and some men got furious, and I saw a few who broke down and were crying. Then we began to have a feeling of what we were going to find inside the camp. My company had collected a number of German soldiers, and they had 2 or 3 men guarding them, and one man was on a machine gun. I had my back turned when I heard the light machine gun go off. Well, at that time, I was running towards him, and I kicked him in the back and grabbed him by the collar, and I yanked him backwards, and I said, "What the hell are you doing?" I drew my pistol and fired it into the air several times to get everybody's attention. And I was yelling, "There'll be no more firing unless I give a specific order." We were still trying to comprehend the enormity of death there and the cruelty that went on there. But just a few moments later, the whole place erupted. The prisoners started streaming out. They had finally realized what was going on.
General Sparks was very vigilant, not allowing his soldiers to slaughter the SS officers, rather to round them up to stand for trial.
Moral courage, to me, is a selfless act, and it's doing the right thing despite the opposition, no matter what the cost. It was only a short time, but it affected him for the rest of his life. That's why it's important that I continue to tell the story, because it's a testimony. Never forget. All of us need to live by a proper code and doing the right thing, and that's what moral courage is all about.
Brigadier General Sparks' story is so amazing, but what I was very interested in was what he did after the war. He demonstrated his personal moral ethics in what he did every day in his life. And he fought for the Jewish people from the standpoint of educating others about what he saw at Dachau and making sure that people really realized what had occurred and what he had witnessed.
We were having a problem with neo-Nazis here in this country and people who put out false propaganda. And the Holocaust memorial services that we have here every year, we begin to have people picket with signs saying this is all a hoax. To say that it never happened is the height of stupidity and viciousness. So I'll fight those type of people to my last breath.
For 2 years in World War II, Felix Sparks didn't see his wife or his son, Kirk. Kirk was born after he was sent to Europe during the war. So in 1945, when Sparks came home, he was able to see Mary, his wife, and for the first time hold his son, Kirk, in his arms. And Kirk is still around. He's still with us, thank goodness. He's in Colorado. He's joining us virtually so that he can accept the 2020 Lyndon Baines Moral Courage Award on behalf of his father. So from me to you, Kirk, I hope you're doing really, really, really well. It's wonderful to have you with us and to accept this award on behalf of your amazing father. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, my name is Kirk Lawrence Sparks. I'm the eldest son of the late Felix Lawrence Sparks, who's also known as Larry Sparks. I am representing the Sparks family. I have my brother Scotty here, along with my two sons, Spencer Sparks and Blair Sparks, with his wife Lynn and their son Blaine. Also, the two grandchildren of my father are here. One is Tammy Sanders, married to Brock, with their children Avery, Skylar, Shaylee, and Jesse. Also, the other one is Natalie Bogucki. She's married to Brian, with their two sons, Braden and Colden. Thank you, Alex. I accept this award from the Houston Holocaust Museum with great pleasure. Thank you.
It's a great, great honor to be with you virtually. I would have loved to have been there to shake your hand in real time in your presence. I want to introduce everybody to you because you're quite an astounding survivor, an astounding, wonderful human being. I'm going to be a little bit formal and make sure that I get your intro right because it's important that people know exactly who you are.
Why do you want to be formal? Why do you want to be formal? Just call me Pinchas.
Okay, so I'll do it really quickly, okay? Formal but quick. You're a survivor of 6 German Nazi concentration camps. You now live in Toronto, Canada, obviously. You were born in Lodz, and you were 8 years old when the war started in 1939.
That's correct.
You, along with your twin sister and then your entire family, fled to Warsaw, and then you were confined in the Warsaw ghetto for 2.5 years.
Right.
I'm just trying to get my head around how unbelievably difficult and how much that must have tested your spirit. You were captured in April 1943 and deported to Maginot Death Camp. When the family arrived at the camp, your mother, father, and sister were murdered by the Nazis.
That's correct.
You eventually passed through several other concentration camps, including Buchenwald, liberated just a few weeks ago, and then finally liberated in Theresienstadt by the Soviet Red Army on May the 8th, 1945, which was the day that the whole world celebrated the end of World War II. So it's now 75 years we're approaching 75 years since the end of World War II. There were 18 million European civilians killed in World War II, and 8th of May, 1945, was a very important day to all Europeans and a very important day to you, sir, Mr. Gutter. Can you explain your emotions? Can you remember your emotions when you were liberated on the 8th of May, 1945?
I can't remember my emotions because, to be quite honest, I think that a child of 8, and when the war finished, I was close to 13 years old. Your emotions were completely stilted. What you reacted to things, you didn't react in a normal way because your brain wasn't efficiently, developed to be able to actually act in a rational way. You had no education. Your education was just fear of death, fear of being beaten, be hungry, be a skeleton. And so basically you're existent in a cocoon. So but I can tell you what happened the day I was liberated. And the day I was liberated, suddenly I hear shouting and the guards have all disappeared. And interestingly enough, the guards at the gate were not SS. They were Czech gendarmes who obviously collaborated with the Germans or were forced to collaborate. I don't make any judgment on that. And so we all ran out, those that could. And because in the last 3 months of the war, I was working in Kolditz in an SS kitchen by Providence, I was well enough because in a kitchen, when you work in a kitchen, you can eat. And the cooks were quite old, so they didn't bother too much, although they were SS. So we ran out and we saw Russian soldiers, mainly from Muslim countries, walking with a couple of tanks, but most of them were walking with infantry, with a bandolier and tobacco in one boot and vodka in another boot. And they were chasing out, the Czechs were chasing out Germans that had been settled, ethnic cleansing by Nazis during the war, and they resettled them. So there where you had these old women and young women and old men and little children on little wooden carts and children's things. And the Nazis the Germans were running around, and at the same time, they were being persecuted by the local population. We didn't do anything. We were just looking. And I felt terrible empathy towards these human beings that were being chased out. And there were a few young boys with me at my age, more or less. We kept together. And I kept on saying, I said, look what's happening. They're chasing them out. And we all felt sorry, despite the fact that we suffered for 5 years. Our empathy was towards human beings that were being, chased and beaten, and things were doing to them. I knew nothing about sex, but I saw these Russian taking women to the forest. There were forests around it, and I felt sorry for them.
So how old were you? How old were you when you were liberated?
I was turning 13 because my birthday was July. So I was just below 13. It was 1945.
Right. When did you find out what had happened to your family?
What happened to my family, I knew in my Danek the next day. Because when we came out, I thought I was going to the guest chamber and I said my prayers. But in my case, water came out of those showers, because in the Warsaw Ghetto, we knew that they had false showers and gas comes out. So I was saying my prayers and I was waiting for gas to come out. In my case, water came out and I was chased out and I was given those striped pajamas, the prisoner's clothing. And I thought to myself, if I am alive, my father must be alive. We aren't killed. So I ran around looking for my father all over the place, and I couldn't see him. So my father, we had a tiny little apartment in the Warsaw Ghetto. And at night, my father used to bring people to sleep in the little kitchen when he used to make wine to sell, and I'm talking about before the deportation. And suddenly I saw a man who I recognized, who used to come and sleep regularly in our, he survived, right? So where's my father? I ran to him and I said, where's my father? Where's my father? And he didn't answer. And after me importuning him and asking him several times, he lifted his eyes to heaven. And he didn't say anything. And I knew that my father, because when we were running, I suddenly realized there was a little man with a white coat pushing people right, left. And of course, the next day, I started asking, the women's camp was number 5. My Danek was divided in 5 camps. And we were in camp number 3. So I asked people who actually went to work, can you find out what happened to my mother and my sister? And people that knew us, and they came back and they told me, unfortunately, your parents were all murdered. And I knew in my Danek within the next day, that they were murdered by the Nazis.
What gave you the strength to carry on? What did you have hope?
I have no idea, because basically in the Warsaw Ghetto already, I kind of isolated myself. I was never scared. So, you know, I collected bottles for my father, which he cleaned, and he made wine in them. And that's how he made a bit of a living. And I was never hungry in the Warsaw Ghetto. That's one thing. My parents, my sister and I, and were never hungry in the Warsaw Ghetto. So I was kind of more or less, I think right from the beginning, I isolated myself like a cocoon. You know, it was like a cocoon where a butterfly is supposed to come out. Unfortunately, I was continuously in that cocoon and no butterfly was coming out. So I had blinkers on my eyes, and I existed in that particular minute, that particular scent. And I was then warned, just make yourself invisible and just keep out of the way. And that's what I tried to do. And one of the things I did in Majdanek, particularly, fortunately for me, and God only knows, I can only ascribe it to Providence, Majdanek was a place of terror. Most of the guards were Ukrainians, and they didn't kill you with bullets, they kill you with spades. And of course, there was the gas chambers. And basically, what actually happened was that the commander of the camp was a fiend about cleanliness. So that's the only camp that I remember was very clean. And there were gardens, today they aren't, if you go there, in front of each barrack, there was like a little garden. So as soon as they started coming out, as you finished the roll call, they would shout, Arbeitskommando, Arbeitskommando, which means they would choose people to go work. And I lay down on my tummy, and I started fiddling with the flowers. And when the Barak Älteste would ask me, what are you doing? I would say the Stubendienst told me that I must look after the flowers, I must take out the weeds, I must be the gardener of this, make it Schönbach. I spoke German by the time from Yiddish. And that was also a saving, because if you could not speak, they would get very angry. So I used to try most of the time. I would just go in as soon as they started, say, Arbeitskommando, Arbeitskommando. I would lie down and I would become a gardener. And always, I got away with it most of the time. If you were called to go to work, or if you were called to be sporting, then the chances were not great for you to survive. And then they used to have selections all the time to the guest chamber. You know, when they watched you and they saw that you weren't so healthy to work, you went to the guest chamber. So you lived in a kind of, in a precarious, in a world where you didn't know from second to second what is going to happen to you. And you didn't actually, I didn't actually worry, because I don't think I had the capacity to accept the intellect. My mind had no education. So I didn't have the intellect to accept it. All I knew is I had to be invisible. And this is what I did.
Right. So were you able to forgive after the war what the SS and Germans did to you, what Nazism did to you and your family and your people and your heritage and your homeland and European civilization? Have you ever really, truthfully been able to forgive what was done?
I believe in punishment, but I do not believe in the death penalty. I cannot forgive. There's no way that you can forgive what happened. And I can't forget. I believe in punishment, but not the death penalty. You know, after the war, there were a lot of people that went around and were, you know, especially amongst the Russians, who suffered terribly. You know, they used to burn all villages and kill people, and they killed 1 million Jews with the Einsatzgruppen. So when they found any Germans, instead of taking them, they used to just shoot them. And then if they did take them to POW, I remember in Kolditz, they used to have a camp where we sometimes, when we marched, we saw them. They kept them in an open field, and they never fed them. They used to come with a truck and throw cabbages on and they were keeping them like animals or worse. So, but I really felt terrible when I actually experienced those things. And another thing I will tell you, when we were on the death march, while we were walking, this was the end of the war. This was middle of April. While we were walking through German villages and towns, because we walked from Kolditz to Theresienstadt. We walked for between 2.5 to 3 weeks. So when we walked through German towns or villages, they were throwing things at us and shouting at us and, the most terrible things. We weren't giving any water, no food. We scrounged we were eating leaves. Anything that was living was food. And sometimes we were kept in a barn and we found a water tap, so we used to drink some water. We drank water from ditches. The moment we crossed the border into Czechoslovakia, Czech people started throwing food because they knew. So these were hungry people. And the Nazi guards started shooting in the area. And they said, if you don't stop, we're going to shoot into your windows. Now, there's the difference between humanity and humanity.
Well, that brings me to my next question, which is, have you had your faith restored in humanity? Do you have faith in humanity?
I believe very much that human beings are wonderful people. The majority of human beings. I believe in humanity. I believe there are people that can be turned. I believe that in every person there is in Hebrew, in the Jewish religion, we call it a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara. There's an angel, or not an angel, but there's a kind of a feeling of goodness and a feeling of badness. In others, we can turn each way. And I believe the majority of human beings are wonderful people. But there are some of them can be turned into bad. And I think it comes from the top. When you get somebody who is a bad person, he can turn through propaganda. What he can do is he increase that angel of that devil in you and make you believe in things which you basically are the normal circumstances you wouldn't believe. So I am a great believer in humanity. And
I was talking to a liberator just a couple of weeks ago, a liberator of Dachau. And he said to me what he couldn't understand right at the end of the war when he liberated Dachau and he saw the scenes that he saw was that the German people, he told me just recently, they went to church a lot. They were good Christians that did this. How did you feel at the end of the war when you looked at what had happened to Europe? Was there something special about Nazism? There was something about Nazism was different to Stalinism, which was also genocidal? What was special about Nazism that made it so incredibly murderous and dangerous so fast?
Well, I think what actually happened, look, anti-Semitism didn't start yesterday, didn't start today. It started a long time. And what actually happened is that Hitler managed to imbibe into the German people as a whole. Because how do you explain at the end of the war people throwing stones, and even after the war being so hostile? People that were in DP camp. I wasn't in DP camp in Germany. I was in Czechoslovakia, and I didn't experience that. But people who were in DP camp, when they went out, they were not very happy the way the Germans related to them, even when they were defeated. Which means that Nazism kind of they created a situation, an ideology where, Hitler said that in letters and in Mein Kampf right from the beginning, that the Jews must be eradicated. that the world will be a much better place if only Aryans, I mean, to his idea, I mean, yeah. I was blonde and I was blue-eyed and I was not an Aryan. But the fact is that the Aryan ideology created this kind of situation. And I think basically, once the war started, there was no end to it. I mean, I think Nazism was an extreme form of anti-Semitism that was latent, and became patent and was built up by the Nazi ideology to such an extent where it was able to take ordinary German people who were going to church. And don't forget that the Catholic Church removed itself from politics before the war, allowed Hitler to come to power, and they were completely quiet. They didn't say anything. And it's so easy to create that terrible the terrible climate where you build up Christ killers. They killed our God. They must be wiped out.
Right. So what have you done since World War II to come out of your cocoon? How did you start to emerge from your emotional and psychological cocoon that kept you alive? How did you start to come out of that cocoon?
Well, basically, it's very interesting. The first 10 years after the war, until 1955, I never even gave a thought to the Holocaust. And I used to meet up with my friends, Holocaust survivors, and we had a Hungarian restaurant where we used to eat every Saturday. We used to buy tickets in advance on Friday. One of us was to buy, and then we used to go. And I remember I was very fond of Hungarian goulash. So I was actually sitting at the bar because there was no room at the, I was eating my goulash. And suddenly I fainted. And I'd never fainted before in my life. I fainted, and, I wasn't unconscious for long. I mean, they put some water on me and I got better. And that night, I had my first nightmare. When they took us out of the bunker in May of 1943, when they caught us, we were marching between flames because the ghetto was burning. So we were marching in flames. And people used to run away from the column, and the Ukrainians and the Nazis were the German SS. They were laughing their head off. They took off their rifle, they started shooting after them, but they didn't care because they knew they were all going to die. And people used to actually run into the flames. And my first nightmare was that I was walking in the street, I ran into the flames, and I was shot in the back and I was burning. That was my first nightmare. And after that, I had lots of other nightmares. And my problems with Holocaust remembrance, not only remembrance, but Holocaust, what happened to me became a very difficult time for me. I mean, as a matter of fact, I used to wake up screaming because I was being gassed. And this went on until I got married, and my wife was the savior because she saved me. She kind of kept me. She looked after the children. I was working. I was very poor. And so at night I used to scream. And eventually in 1967, I was going through such a tough time that I needed medical help. The doctor that treated me, and he said, you can get along now, okay. He said, when I started with you, I didn't think that you will ever survive. But you see the bottom of this door, which is closed, and there's a little split there. You crawled right through there, and you made it on the other side. So this is how I started recovering, and that was around about, I think it was about 1970. So this is now, and I started being able to kind of function much more better, despite the fact that even before I worked and I suffered, and I looked after I gave food to my wife and my children, but it was her. She is the one that kept me. She's the one that saved me. She's the one to this day that I rely whenever I have bad times.
So let's talk about remembrance, the importance of remembrance, and let's talk specifically about the Holocaust Museum in Houston. Why is it so important that that museum, number one, exists? And why should we be supporting it so strongly? What's so important?
I think the importance of a Holocaust museum in Houston or any other place is absolutely vital. It's vital in the sense that it teaches people quite clearly, especially if they have and they had the new dimension in testimony where people could interact with Holocaust survivors, and they still have, fortunately, there's still quite a few Holocaust survivors alive, but it's a place where you can learn about the iniquity that human beings can get to when the time is right, or when a person or persons, come into this world who their whole idea is to destroy and to kill. And that's what's happening at the moment. It breaks my heart when I see the Rohingya, from Burma being chased out and living in those thousands and tens of thousands. When I see the Syrians, and I mean, this is going on all the time. It's got to do with horrible people who's only interested in their own ideology, in their own whatever they want to achieve. And that is why Holocaust Museum in Houston is vital to teach people living in Houston what can happen, what shouldn't happen, and how they should grow up, especially the youngsters. Because when you are young, you can absorb the knowledge. You can absorb, your mind is not trained yet. So you can actually teach people to use that good angel inside you to flourish and to create good things instead of bad things. And that is why there is no way that you can do it any other way except to have a space like a Holocaust Center in Houston to be able for people to come there and to go out to schools, to go out to universities, and to get Holocaust survivors to speak. And that is the most important thing that I think in this world, because with the iniquity that you see at the moment, especially now that we have television, you see there's a lot of terrible things going on, and we wanted to stop. I wanted to stop. I know the world can be a better place. It's taking a long time. The world is a better place.
Yeah.
The world is a better place. It's not like in the 1930s. In Canada, apparently, we took in 30 to 40,000 Syrian refugees. Now, nobody wanted to take Jewish refugees in the 1930s. So things has improved, but very slowly, very slowly.
In your amazing life, you've seen the darkest things. Can you tell us a little bit about the things that are light, that give you hope? Some of the things that have really, in the last couple of decades, say, have really given you a lot of hope and inspired you to carry on with your mission to educate and to teach about this very dark chapter in human history?
Well, I will tell you things, 2 or 3 things that happened in the darkest time. The first thing that happened was when I was in Skaržisko, in that death working camp, I had typhoid. And my friends, you had spotted typhoid. And my friends used to take me to work, because if you went to what they call the Krankenstube, the kind of the place where they put people, a sick bay, a so-called sick bay, with hardly any doctors and hardly any medicine, they took a lorry would come, and every few days, they didn't come regularly because they knew people would run away. So they used to come intermittently. They would fill you up, take you to the forest. We were surrounded by forest, and they would have graves and shoot you because you weren't arbeitsfähig. You couldn't work anymore. So they used to take me. One day, I couldn't walk anymore because at this spotted typhoid, there is a crisis where you have high fever, and if you can get over that, you might survive. So I was in a bunk. They put me on the top bunk. They covered me with straw. We didn't have blankets. We were sleeping on straw. And there was night shift and day shift. The day shift, the barracks had to be empty. And the Jewish police, in the internal police, there were Jewish police, and Ukrainians, they would walk around and they would check if the barracks were empty, if anybody was there. So the Jewish policeman came into my barrack. The Ukrainian was standing outside. And he stood on the first bunk to see what's happening on top. He came to my bunk, looked into my eyes, and he said, Canada, nobody is here. And he risked his own life, because if they found out that he could have been now demoted, but he risked his position to save my life. And the next day, crisis went over, and I went back to work, and there was a policeman, Katz, that used to look after me because he knew my family in Woods. He put me on night shift, which was easier. And at that night shift, women were working, and one of them made me work with the easiest work. She was the kind of the Vorarbeiter, the foreman, and she came and gave me an apple because there were Christians working there, and sometimes the women used to get better food from them. They had friends. So she took away from her. I never saw an apple in the Warsaw Ghetto, but she gave me an apple because this little boy needed to recover from typhoid. So this, and then I want to tell you another story. How did I finish in the SS kitchen? When we got to Kolditz from Buchenwald, there was a roll call, and the SS man in charge was not a high officer. He was an Oberscharführer, a kind of staff sergeant, and he said in German, "Ob das kleine Buben, die müssen aussteigen." If there are young men, or young people, they must step out. Stepping out as a youngster, you knew youngsters were being killed. You don't step out. But God made me step out. I was the only one. When everybody went, he took me by the hand. I had no idea what he was going to do with me. He took me to the SS kitchen, and he said to me, "Du wirst du arbeiten hier." And he had a reason for it, because the Germans were short of food also. He took a big brown bag, put it in a corner, and he said, "Whenever you can, put some potatoes or carrots, whatever you can." And of course, it was dangerous for me, because if I was caught, they would shoot me. But God helped me, and for the 3 months I was there, they never caught me, and he looked after me. And when we were on the death march, he was in charge, and he had a bicycle, an ordinary bicycle, and he would run backwards and forward. The other guard would walk. And every time that I would kind of lag behind, he would push me back, and from time to time, he would give me something to eat. And he said, "You don't want to die." 1,500 of us left the camp, Kolditz. Only 750 approximately arrived. All the others died or were shot on the way. He didn't treat me like dirt. He treated me like a human being, and he tried very hard to push me back into the column each time where I was lagging slightly behind. "No, you must. You don't want to die. You want to live." And I survived that death march. And I can tell you the terrible thing. There was a 50, 60-year-old corporal who had a gun with a wooden stock. I still remember. The Nazis in that camp, they had a favorite young man who they used to feed well, and he used to dress properly. He was dressed, and they loved him. I have no idea why, but they loved him. Every morning, like that night, we were in a barn, and we found corn, so we were eating the raw corn, and then we slept. And at dawn, they woke us up, and of course, counting, always counting, roll call, counting. And everybody was there except one. So they got mad and they started running around looking for whoever, and who he overslept underneath, and this was this young man who they all loved. This corporal, this elderly corporal, with this gun with the wooden, I don't know what kind of a gun it was, but it had a wooden handle, a short gun with a wooden handle. It must have been like a machine gun. He put it
Schmeisser machine pistol. It's a Schmeisser.
Something like that. He put him between his legs and he shot him. And he was lying then. He was lying and we all couldn't believe it. And he was, he was still shaking, after dying. And you know what happened? Other people ran from the prisoners and take off he had nice shoes. So they took off his shoes because we were all barefoot and with rags and things like that. So you can actually just by giving you these pictures, you can see the worst and the best.
Right, exactly.
In human being.
Well, in these strange times when most of us are locked down and going through quarantine, these very strange times, do you have a message to people who are out there and a little bit nervous about the future, worried about the future? What's your message of reassurance today in these difficult times?
My personal message is very straightforward. Human beings are very resilient, and human beings must believe that from darkness comes light. And I think there will be light at the end of the darkness. They must just stick to what they are told, keep different spaces between themselves, isolate themselves, and if they go to work, wear masks, do what the health properties tell you, and this darkness will become light, and we will overcome this, like we've overcome many, many other things in the life of this planet. Things are going to get much better, and from now on, just believe that from darkness comes light.
Well, I'd like to say, Pinchas, thank you so much for sharing what must have been an very emotional experience this for you. It has been for me. I wanted to say on behalf of the Holocaust Museum in Houston, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your story of both darkness and ultimately great light. You're a great inspiration to me. I'm sure everybody watching you now will also feel just as inspired. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being with us and talking to us. Thank you so much.
And thank you for having me. I really believe that I would very much like to see you again and again, but not in virtual, but in real life. And then we can have a long conversation.
Thank you for joining us for our virtual event and for your support and dedication to our mission. With HMH celebrating its 25th anniversary in March 2021, our message of From Darkness, Light has never been more relevant. If you'd like to further support our efforts in teaching the dangers of hatred, prejudice, and apathy, please text HMH to 41444 or go to hmh.org/tribute. Thank you for joining us. Your unwavering support of Holocaust Museum Houston and your selfless generosity means more than I can ever express. Together, we will remember. We will teach. Together, we will make the world a better place.